Hello and welcome to yet another installment of the series of videos that I've been putting up with respect to the project that I've been working on for many years and which I've only recently realized is a 3-volume project. The first volume was a book that was published 2004 by the University of Delaware Press called Ritual Unbound, and which deals with scapegoating rituals in a variety, beginning with, in the introduction, Sophocles' Oedipus the King, in which Oedipus, the protagonist of the play, is also the scapegoat of the community of Thebes. The second volume, which came out just last year, was published in Bucharest, the Séance of Reading, Uncanny Designs in Modernist Writing. Maybe just to mention, Ritual Unbound, the first volume, then, I put it on the internet, the PDF, several years ago. There's no paywall, there's no charge for it. It's yours if you'd like to read it. I suppose, put in Cousineau Ritual Unbound, and it's on my academia.edu page, and you're very, very welcome, more than welcome then to read it, to respond to me if you want in some way, one way or another. The Séance of Reading, I have not put it on the internet because it would not be nice to do that. It was just published last year in Bucharest. It's very inexpensive. It's being sold, I think it's 26 Romanian lei. It's the equivalent of $4 or $5. Postage, to be sure, would be a bit more than that. The third volume, if I can get this up, it has not been published yet, and who knows when it will be. There was a 19-year period between the first volume and the second volume. There will not be, presumably, I will not be granted 19 years for the publication of the third volume, but it will have, and I'm going to work very, very hard to get it done rather quickly, it will have this image, which is an amphora fashioned in the classical Greek period by Ezekiel, 6th century BCE, and the title is Ajax and Achilles playing a board game. So very interestingly, I'm not going to say too much now, but a scene not drawn from the Iliad. It gives us a kind of X-ray on what I call the bilateral design of the Iliad, but it's not drawn from the Iliad itself. Ajax and Achilles don't play dice in the Iliad. Never, never, never. So it's rather interesting. It's a virtual scene, but a virtual scene that throws a good deal of light on again the bilateral design. So this third book will be called, the title will be Balancing All, the Bilateral Imperative of Writing. And what I realize is that, so I'll have the three volumes, the Ritual Unbound, the Séance of Reading, and Balancing All. And what I realize is that, well, let me say this. In my own mind now, which is not to say in the original volumes, but now as I see that I have this project, which is kind of a trilogy in a way. I just realized the first essay that I ever published was in the Humanities magazine at Boston College, and it was on Aeschylus's Oresteia trilogy. So what I'm doing obviously does not have the eminence of that, but it does the idea of a kind of trilogy of, if not an artistic trilogy, as Thomas Bernhard had with 3 of his novels. It is a kind of critical trilogy. Okay, and in the introductory chapters now, the introductory chapter, or the introduction if I give lectures related to the project, for volume 1 on Ritual Unbound then, because it has to do with scapegoating, the emergence of a scapegoating ritual, of an ancient, of an archaic scapegoating ritual within the context of of a pre-literate ritual within the context of one of the great monuments of literacy, of literature, as it were. So because it will have to do with scapegoating, it will be the Oedipus complex, not Freud's Oedipus complex by any means, but rather the complex triangular, if you will, between the community and Oedipus, and the obligation then of the community to expel, to exile Oedipus as a way of, so to blame Oedipus for the plague, having blamed him, to then get rid of him with the expectation that the plague will be removed. By the way, remember, Sophocles never shows that. He doesn't even show Oedipus being expelled from Thebes. Rather, he shows Creon going back to the oracle. More on that at some other time. I should not be pausing over it. Okay, with the second, in this book, the Séance of Reading, the introductory chapter is called the Manole Complex. The Manole Complex, a Romanian will recognize immediately where I'm getting that from. It's from the legend of Master Manole, about which I will not say anything more now, but that I expect that as I continue, and in my own mind again, as I conceptualize my project, I probably will go back to the concept of the or the coinage of the Daedalus complex. I had the Daedalus complex with me for many years, and then I was given a Fulbright to teach at the University of Bucharest, and that's where I learned about this legend of Master Manole. And since I wanted this to be very, very much a made in Romania book, I replaced Daedalus with Manole. I think I'm coming back now to Daedalus because that makes, for reasons of euphony, so I remember learning about as a young boy. So euphonically then we have Oedipus, Daedalus, Ezekias, a very, very nice triplet, as it were, a very harmonious, phonetically and very lovely triptych of those, made of those three names. Just to, there are many things that are coming to mind. I'll say, moving on though, and not pausing over other things that may be even more interesting than what I plan to talk about, I realized, there's a university in Romania called Babeș-Bolyai University. It's in the city of Cluj-Napoca. And I went to a conference there a couple of years ago, and I forget how it is, I found out there was this man, an eminent literary critic named Franco Moretti, who's invented something that is a coinage. He came up with something called distant reading. And so it seemed to me that from what I learned later, that it's something which is taken quite seriously there, and maybe seriously elsewhere as well. I think he's been given various distinctions. But what I found really curious, because I never heard of distant reading before until 2 years ago, I went to this conference in Cluj-Napoca at Babeș-Bolyai University, and I realized, though, as I was listening to people talk about it, that it was like, Monsieur Jourdain in Molière's play, Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, where suddenly I thought, hey, I've been doing distant reading. Remember, Monsieur Jourdain, he thinks, oh gosh, he has to learn how to speak prose. He's never heard of prose before. And then he realizes it's what he's been doing, he's been speaking his whole life. So I realized that my 3-volume project is an example of distant reading, but not, I read Moretti's book. I reread it even, I think, in preparation for the talk that I gave at Babeș-Bolyai University, where he has his little triumvirate there of graphs, maps, and trees, and then in parallel with that, or matching that, or putting it side by side, I had this idea of Oedipus, Daedalus, and Ezekias as forms. Maybe to explain for a moment, what Moretti means is that, and he goes on, it's really interesting. I watched a couple of videos. He says, in the past we could only do 10 works or study 100 works. Now we can do thousands, tens of thousands, as though this is something really, really wonderful. Like we don't have to watch Michael Jordan play basketball. We don't have to read Homer's Iliad. We can watch all these kids playing basketball across the street. We can read all these other literary works that are not worthless, but that don't have the value of the Iliad and of all the other works that I talk about in my project. So in the I'm going to have to stop in a minute or two because I have something that a very pressing obligation. But I will say that in all three, what I realized thinking about this 3-volume project, in all three of those rituals, in all three of the phases of the project, whether it's a scapegoating ritual or a building ritual in the Manole legend, or the creation of left-right symmetry, bilateral symmetry in Ezekias's amphora, that what we experience, and this is why it is a seance of reading, and this kind of looks like a seance of reading here, a seance of reading in which what emerges, remember, it's something that's been hidden, something that's been repressed, something that's been forgotten about, perhaps, and that what it is in all three of them is the double, or a double. So with Oedipus, in Ritual Unbound, it's in Oedipus the King, the play, it's the relationship between the single community over here and the single figure of Oedipus. In the legend of Master Manole, there are different ways of thinking about it. It's Manole and his wife Anna, who must be immured in the walls of the monastery, or also we could think it's Anna and the monastery, the living being then, and who must die in order that this inanimate thing, unliving thing, shall live. The monastery, the walls will no longer collapse as they had been. Also with Daedalus, remember, it's Daedalus who glories in the Oedipus. Daedalus is a double figure like Oedipus. Oedipus is the good king and the bad king. Daedalus is the extraordinary inventor because of this great art that he possesses. But remember that he curses his art as he's burying Icarus, and also as Manole is cursing his art, is regretting his art as he's immuring his wife in the walls of the monastery. And Ezekias is quite wonderful as well, because Ezekias wrote at the bottom, and I forget what it is in Greek, but he wrote that he was the one who not only crafted the amphora with the bilateral design, but also who painted who represented the game that's being played by Ajax and Achilles. So maybe I'll end with this. I better end with it because I have to get going. That to notice the way in which, and there's the double with Ezekias, that he's telling a story, he's reminding us of a story, the Iliad, and the story of the Trojan War, but he's bilateralizing it. He's telling it in terms of left, right. You don't have the three parts of the plot. You have the left side and the right side. And to remember, and I'll end with this, the Iliad itself is constructed in the same way. that Homer, the story of the Trojan War is in three parts. It begins with Helen being stolen from by going along willingly perhaps by Paris from her husband. Then you have the war, and then finally you have the destruction of Troy. But no, remember, Homer doesn't tell that story. He tells a very bilateral story, which I'll be talking about. I'll put up a video devoted exclusively to the Iliad. I'll do it rather soon. But notice this very quickly. He begins the Iliad with the burial of dozens of hundreds of anonymous, of unnamed Greek soldiers who have died in battle. He concludes with the death of Hector and the funeral of Hector. So an anonymous funeral, a very named funeral to be sure, the opposite of anonymous at the end. There are all kinds of ways, and I don't have time to go into it now, but where Homer himself, and all Ezekiel is doing, I call it the Ezekiel complex, Ezekiel is bringing out, he's staging the emergence of a bilateral design which is hidden in the Iliad. Okay, so much more to say about that. I hope you found it interesting, and that to note there are a number of other videos, and there'll be so many more as I go along. Okay, bye-bye for now.